Welcome back to the TimCo Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. Basically, this is practice for what you ask to do in a real job. In this lesson, we're going to be publishing our site to IIS. And the reason we're doing that is because Blazor WebAssembly will not work offline while in development mode. And that's a safety thing for us, but that does mean that we have to publish it somewhere. Now we're going to publish it locally to IIS. So we're going to see how to put IIS on Windows locally, but that will also give us a good look at how to deploy a Blazor application to a Windows server. All right, now for those of you who are subscribed to my Patreon, the $5 per month level or higher, head over to get a copy of today's source code. That'll give you a good copy to compare your code to in case you run into an issue. Let's jump right into Visual Studio. Now, we're going to publish this Blazor web application. And the reason why is because if I were to run this and try to do offline access with a progressive web application, it's going to not work. Okay, so even if I were to grab this and say, let's pull it over here, even if I were to grab this and go, okay, let's publish this offline, it's not going to actually work offline, all right? And I won't install it yet. We're going to wait to install it until we actually publish it. But I want to show you why. So let's open up our www root folder. And in here, we're going to see a couple of files. First of all, our manifest.json file. This is a file that is set up with the name and short name of our application. We have background color, theme color, and an icon. Now, it's all standard. It comes with the template, but we'll want to change those things so that they're customized to us. The other thing is the service-worker.js. Now, this file right here is very empty. In fact, there's 3 lines of comment and only 1 actual line of code. And that code is basically nothing. It says, don't fetch anything. And what this means is that it's not going to work offline. So this service worker, this is part of a progressive web application. It's an internet standard, not just a Microsoft thing. But this is where we would enable offline support. But notice it says in development, always fetch from the network and do not enable offline support. Now I say that caching would make development more difficult. Changes not be reflected in the first load after each change. Let me explain what that means here. So when you run your application as a progressive web application, what happens is that it works essentially offline first, unless you set up differently. But basically it works offline first, which means it's going to load up the application that's installed on your computer. And then in the background, it's going to check to see if there's new changes. And if there is, it's going to download those changes and install them, but not run them. Not until the next time you run the application. You have to actually shut down the application and restart it in order for those changes to be applied. And that has to do with not changing an application midstream. It'd be kind of weird if you were halfway through filling out a form and all of a sudden the application reloaded and all your data is gone, or the form changes. So we want to wait until the application gets restarted in order to apply those new changes. That's just, again, a standard. The problem is that then if you're in debugging mode, you're always going to be debugging one version ago. So if you make a change, you have to load the web application, wait long enough for it to download the new changes, then shut it down, then start it up again, and now your changes are applied. Makes for a very tricky debugging environment, a very frustrating debugging environment, especially when you forget about it that one time and then you're not sure why your changes didn't work, and so you rip out all the changes and try something different, and then the thing works the next time, but then it doesn't work the time after that because you forgot that the changes are lagging one version behind, so your changes actually did work, but you thought they didn't work, so you ripped them out, and it causes a mess. So Microsoft has said, you know what? When you're in debug mode, when you're running your application from Visual Studio, don't make anything offline. Now, that does not mean just in debug mode. Also, release mode will still work the same way. This will not change if you're running from Visual Studio. You have to publish your web application. Now, what does publishing do? Well, if you notice right down here, this little icon next to the service worker, this little arrow, indicates there's something underneath. Whenever you see an arrow, it means there's something underneath. Notice CSS, there's things underneath that. So under service worker, there is serviceworker.published.js. Let's open that up and notice a lot more stuff. So we have event listeners for install, activate, and fetch. We have an offline cache, and those assets include DLLs, PDB files, WASM files, HTML, JavaScript, JSON files, CSS files, PNGs, JPEGs, GIFs, and a whole lot more. So these files will all be cached offline. We will exclude the serviceworker.js files. Okay, so that's what's included and excluded. And here's some setup for what to do on install, on activate, on fetch, and so on. So this is all boilerplate stuff. You can tweak it if you want to. If you decide, hey, you know what, we've got PDFs, and I don't think PDFs are in this list here. No, they're not. So PDFs aren't in the offline asset include. Well, you just add an entry for PDF and follow the same basic pattern. So with that, we could ensure that our application will work offline. But you have to publish it. Well, we're going to publish our application. Now, I could publish to Azure, which I've been doing automatically using our DevOps process, but for a development loop, you want that to be as quick as possible. And by development loop, I mean I make a change, I see that change working. Now, the quickest and the shortest development loop is just hitting the start button and seeing the application run. But we have to publish this in order to test the offline functionality, which is what we want to test right now. So it's a little bit larger of a loop. And that is that I want to come up here, right click, and say publish this. And I'm going to publish this application to an IIS, which actually is going to be just a folder. Okay, I'm going to show you how Internet Information Server works, IIS, and that's installed or installable on Windows machines. So we're going to set this up on this machine. Now, I don't have IIS installed locally, so I'm going to walk you through the process on my machine, and you can do the same thing on your machine. So first off, I'm going to bring up the apps and features. Now, I use the Windows X key to bring this menu up, but you can just search for apps and features if you want. And that will bring up this dialog right here. Now, this dialog has all the installed applications on my computer. However, this is not the only place to find installed applications. I know it's confusing. I'm not sure why Microsoft's doing both. I think it has to do with legacy, but there's related programs and features. Click on that, and that brings up the control panel entry. This is just how I get to it. You could go to control panel and look for programs and features. Just note that apps and features is not programs and features, but there is a link to it there. You want the programs and features because in here, we have the option to turn Windows features on or off. This left-hand option over here, and that brings up this dialog right here. This is the dialog we need, the turn Windows features on or off. And in here, if you will notice, we have Internet Information Services. This is what we want. Check that box. Now it's going to go black because not everything inside is installed. It's not going to install FTP by default, and it's not even going to install all of the management tools or all the www services. And that's okay. You just want the defaults as they stand right now. So Internet Information Services, check that box, hit OK. That's going to install IIS on your machine. That may take a little bit, but once it's installed, go ahead and reboot the computer and then you should be good. Okay. Now, its reference assembly is not installed on your computer, on your system. Of course it's not. Let me figure out what that is. So it seems that the resolution was try it again. It just worked. Not sure why that is. It may have to do with needing a reboot or having done this a couple times on my computer. I've installed it and uninstalled it. But in any event, we have now installed IIS, which means now what we can do is we can install the core hosting bundle. And I'll leave this link down in the description down below. But we have the .NET Core Hosting Bundle. And this is necessary to install in order to host .NET Core on IIS. So there's a direct download. Click the button right there. It's going to open the installer. It's going to download the installer. We're going to open the installer from there and make sure it's installed on our machine. Now, I've already done this once. I'm not sure if I'll do it again, but either way, we'll check to make sure it's installed. This is important. And once you do this, you then should reboot your machine. And the reason why is because it's going to make sure that it restarts all of IIS. You could stop and start the IIS service, but I find it better to just do a full reboot to make sure everything is up to date and set up. So once this downloads, we'll run this, and then I'm going to reboot my machine. Okay, almost there. 1 second left. It says, it lies. All right, open the file, agree to terms, install. That's going to use a UAC dialog, which is just that permission elevation dialog. It's going to install all the hosting items necessary. We're done. And now we just need to, again, restart our IIS, which means, in my case, just restart the whole computer. Okay, we now have a full reboot on my machine. Everything is restarted. We should be good to go. Let's open up Internet Information Server or Services. This is IIS. If you hit the Windows key on Windows and just type IIS, this should be the first thing that comes up. If not, it's the second thing that comes up, depending on what's installed on your machine. But look for Internet Information Services Manager on your machine. Okay, this is IIS. This is what Windows servers use to host websites. We're going to use it locally to host our website. Now you may be thinking, hey Tim, we have IIS Express that we use in Visual Studio, so why are we using this? Well, because IIS Express is basically for working with Visual Studio, which again is not the same thing as published. We're going to fully publish our web application. There's lots of ways we could do this. We could have published a Docker. We're already publishing to Azure. That's a little far away. It takes a little extra time to get there. And again, we want as short a developer loop as possible. But I figured this way we could see IIS and how we deploy to it, because this is the same process and the same interface, same everything basically as a Windows server, and how we deploy a website to a real server really in production. Okay, so it's installed on my desktop. So I expand it out. We have the sites folder. It's a little small, but this sites folder here, we expand the sites folder, and we have the default website. That's what we'll use. We could right click here and say add website, but then we have to change port numbers because only one website can use a given port number. So we're going to use the default website right here, and that's going to, these icons now represent the default website. So if we were to browse port 80 right now, this browse button over here, and that would open up our browser, and we would, once it loads up, we should get, actually, I think maybe trying to load it's trying to load what I previously had used as an example site, and it can't find it. So it's not doing anything right now. So what we'll do is we'll do some configuration changes on IIS to set this up to work with our Blazor WebAssembly project. The first thing is we're going to come over here to the left to Application Pools, select this, select the default application pool, open it up, and for our .NET CLR version, change that to no managed code. okay? Because we're going to use .NET Core. This is for .NET Framework. We're going to do no managed code because we're using .NET Core, not Framework. All right, now notice that over here on the right, there is stop, start, and recycle. So we could recycle that now we've made the change just to make sure that in fact it's using the latest selection we had just made. Now, what is an application pool? That is what kind of powers the websites we have running. So we have to have an application pool in order to run one or more websites out of. So this website right here will use a specific application pool, and that I believe is in basic settings. So basic settings over here, notice default app pool is the application pool. And you can choose a different one if you wanted to, but that's the one we want. Okay, yes, there's a lot of stuff around IIS. It takes an administrator to administrate an IIS server. I'm giving you just the high level basics. That's not kind of the point of this, but I do want to at least explain what we're doing so you understand instead of saying do this and you're not sure why. Okay, so there's a balancing act here. All right, now we do have one more thing we need to do, and that's something it's a MIME type. So you go back over here, this MIME type icon right here, this is what it does is it configures how the web server deals with certain file extensions. Okay, so if we open this up, we'll see a whole bunch of file extensions. But notice down here, HTM and HTML. So we can see right here, these two, it says, okay, the type of file is text/HTML. This is the known MIME type. Okay, so we can apply this MIME type to other extensions. Let's just say, we're not going to do it, but let's just say we are going to go rogue. And instead of having HTML files or HTML files, we're going to have HTZ files. We're going to create that. But there's still HTML files. The stuff inside is still an HTML document. We just named it HTZ for some reason. Well, we would just come in here and add an extension called .htz and say it's text/HTML, because that MIME type describes the content inside the file. That way, the IIS server knows how to handle it, because an HTML file gets interpreted as a markup file. It looks through it and says, okay, here's how I'm going to display this data. It's not just printed to the screen. It actually says, okay, an H1 tag means a heading 1, and that I'm going to show it this way, and so on. Other files, for example, if we see down here, we should see a zip file. So that's an application/x-zip-compressed. Why is that important? Because it's not going to try and interpret a zip file to see how to display it on the web. It's going to just download it. Okay, so when you have a link to a .zip file, it's going to download it instead of trying to open it and run it. All right, so there's all these different MIME types in here, and these are the default ones that come with IIS. However, we need to add a couple new ones. So for example, we have a .dat file. Well, notice that there is a .cur, a .dcr. There's no DAT in between these two. So we have to add a new MIME type. So .dat, let me zoom in here so you can see a little better. .dat, and the MIME type here is application/octet stream. Okay, I'm actually going to copy, well, I'll retype it. That's fine. So notice .cur and CSV are the same application/octet stream, but this .dat file has been added. We need to add one more, and that is the .blat, and again, application/octet stream. Make sure you type that correctly. Hit OK, and that will add the BLAT type. So those two have to be added for Blazor to operate on our IIS machine. And yes, that's configuration that you're like, well, how would you know that? Well, you have to read the documentation, and that's part of being an IIS administrator. Should it be easier? It sure should. And if you use things like Docker, it will be easier because you can just deploy to a Docker container that already knows how to deal with Blazor. Or if you deploy to Azure, you don't have to know anything pretty much. You just deploy to Azure and it will work. But when we're setting up our own server, we have to configure it. All right, now I want to change the directory for the website. So if we go here under basic settings, we'll see that the physical path to our website is this path right here. So it's the system drive inet pub www root. I'm going to change that to something else. I'm actually going to copy this for now, just so we have it in case I need it later. But I am going to go to c:\samples/ and I do not believe I have a Blazor demo here. So let me go ahead and in here, I'll make a new folder. Let's call this our TimCo. Okay, that's now our folder to publish to, because that's our folder where, I'm going to copy that as well. That's the folder where we have IIS pointed. All right, so let me open that up. Let me open up my File Explorer and, sorry, open off screen. There we go. So this is our TimCo folder right now. This is where the IIS is pointing to make sure to see our published files. Now I'm going to right click on samples, go to properties. One of the things that I've noticed under security, advanced, and I am going to replace all child permissions here and apply. This is something I've noticed in at least my installation, because it's a enterprise installation of Windows, that it really does not like to give permissions to these folders. So I already have the permission set up for basically everyone to have full control. Notice everyone full control. But it doesn't always work that well. So what I'm going to do is make sure that's applied to this folder so that everyone has access to this folder. Because you have to make sure your permissions are correct. Otherwise, what will happen is that IIS can't execute, because IIS doesn't operate under your permissions. It operates under a IIS specific account. All right, now we're going to set up SSL for a site. That's something else that's important to do. But you have to have a certificate for SSL. The whole point of SSL is that it's encrypted from end to end, and that encryption comes through a certificate, and that certificate has to be trusted. Now, in order to do that, we're going to have to create a temporary or a local certificate, because we're just doing it locally. Now, we can trust our own computer to create a certificate, but in order to do that, we have to set one up. There is an easy way of doing this. I'm going to open up Notepad, and I'm going to copy from off screen, but I have it on my another notepad. I'm going to copy it and paste it here. If you have, let me see and kind of stretch this out a little bit. If you, is this actually, yeah, I can't. This wraps. So it's all one line. It's not multiple lines here. At least this, after this part isn't. So from printf on down is one line. But this right here is a script you can run in Linux. Not on Windows. It uses OpenSSL. You'd have to install OpenSSL in order to get this to run on Windows. Okay? But the good news is that on Windows now, we have Windows Subsystem for Linux. So here's my terminal. I can actually open up my Ubuntu version of Linux. This is a full Linux version running on Windows, and it's integrated into my computer. So I can then just say, yes, I'm going to paste this and run this. And what this will do is it will create for me my certificate. Okay. So this generated my certificate for me, and it's now in this location. So C users Tim Corey. That's where it's located. Let me see if you can find that. Let me open up a new browser here. And It's under C users Tim Corey. So if we come in here, we'll see two files. If we zoom in here, we'll see localhost.crt and localhost.key. So if you right click on localhost.crt and say install certificate, it's going to ask you where to install it. You can install it in, I believe, current user or local machine. I use local machine. I hit next. There's a UAC prompt that's going to pop up. And then you can choose where to have it installed. But I believe if you go to the root certificate, trusted root, not test root, not trusted people, I believe it's in trusted root certificate authorities that you install this this certificate. Okay, you can try letting it automatically decide where it goes, but you need to install that certificate. I've already installed one, which, yeah, you can only install one at a time, and uninstalling is a pain, so I just left it there. But what I'm going to do is, if you're a Patreon member, I'll post this as part of the blog post for this video. So if you're at the Patreon at the $5 per month level or higher, where you get the source code, you'll also get this. You can just copy and paste. Otherwise, you're going to have to recreate this by retyping it. Sorry, there's not an easy way of putting this in the description. It makes it a mess, and it's possibly going to get interpreted poorly by YouTube. So I don't want to do that. So I'll have to post it in the blog post for the TimCo video. Okay, so pause the video right now, type that out in your notepad, and use that to create your certificate. If you're on Windows and don't have Windows Subsystem for Linux, there is a URL you can follow. I will paste this URL in the description down below. Let's go there. So this will walk you through, let's reject all tracking. This is how to install OpenSSL on your Windows machine, and then how to generate the CSR for generating your certificate. Okay, so you can install OpenSSL on your machine, and then you can do the whatever you call it, that script I showed you. Okay, so certificates, again, a little tricky, but if you were running a real Windows server, you'd be going through a third party to get that certificate and paying a few dollars to get that set up, unless you use one of the free services. But I think it's Let's Encrypt. Anyways, so with that, we now have a certificate installed. We can, yes, and install it in the root certificate location. Okay, now we're going to add HTTPS to our site. So to do that, we go to our bindings. Let's go over here and zoom in where it says Edit Site. Under Bindings, select that. And then in here, notice we have HTTP on port 80. We're going to add HTTPS. Now, assigned IP addresses. So we could assign one of my IP addresses, or we can say all unassigned, which basically means all of them. And by default, we get port 443. This is where if we have multiple sites we're hosting, we could change the port number here to be a different port number if we wanted to. Leave it the default, leave the IP address at the default. Don't put a host name in here. This would be if you wanted to have multiple sites on one set of ports. Then what you do is you have to have a host name so that, let's just say they went to www.testsite or timco.com. If you had overridden your DNS server to point to your machine, then it could look at this and say, okay, if you ask for timco.com, then it would go to this site. And if you ask for something else, it would go to that site, and so on. So a little more complicated. We're not going to do that. Leave it all like this. But you do need to change the SSL certificate down here. You're going to find the one you just installed. Mine's called I am Tim Corey Local. You can actually view this. Notice it said issued to this desktop, issued by this desktop. That means that we've trusted this desktop to issue certificates to ourselves. And there's a certification path, and it's okay. Okay? You have to have a valid certificate. It is valid if you trust it. And since we trust it ourselves, we're good to go. Do not do this in production. I'm just saying this right now. Don't do it in production because it sounds like it's free, but no one else trusts us to generate certificates. That's where a third-party certificate authority that everyone trusts can issue us a certificate, but we can't issue ourselves a certificate because no one else trusts us. All right, so with that, we now have HTTPS for our site. So now our site is set up. We are ready to go in theory. Now let's make it work. So let's publish to that samples location. Okay, I'm going to grab that, that path. We're going to right click on portal. We're going to say publish. We're going to publish to a folder. Hit next. And I'm going to publish to, let's publish to right where it's at right. No, let's publish to this C samples TimCo. It's not going to work this way. We're going to have to go one level deeper, but I'll show you how that works. Okay, so we're going to publish to that TimCo folder. And we'll hit finish. And we're going to say publish. And this will publish ours. It'll build our site first, and then it will publish just the portal portion of our site to the correct location. Okay, so here is the folder. Notice it's empty. So while this is building first, and then it will start creating those files and publish them out to this location. Okay, so the build started. Let's hit refresh here. We have some files, and now we have succeeded. One published. Notice it's just a web.config file, and then a www root folder inside of that. So if we were to launch this right now, let's open this up and go to HTTPS localhost, like so. It's saying, hey, it's not secure, and we can say continue, and it says the data is invalid. All right, that's not the right path. Now, let's go back to IIS, and let's actually change this path. Basic settings. Let's change the path to be one level deeper at the www root, because that's the actual files they want. And if we hit refresh here, we may have to restart the site. Loading, loading, loading. The other thing is we have to run our actual site here. So let's do this. Let's run just our API. So I'll set that as startup project, because the API has to be running. The rest doesn't. The other things don't have to be running, but we have to have an API to talk to in order for the TimCo site to work. All right. Let me rearrange some things on the other screen because I got lots of stuff opening up. And let's see if we can't get this to load. The other thing, hit F12 and go to network, disable cache, and refetch that. And we're still getting a 404 error here. Let's find out why. Now, I've played around with this a little bit. I think this is actually a red herring because it's not working here. And if I hit refresh, it's still having a problem with a few of these things. However, if you look at it and you look at the connection is secure and look at the certificate looks fine. And so even though we are disabling the cache here, I think there's a caching problem inside of this version of Chrome, because if I open it in my other profile, loads just fine. So it has to do something with the caching in Chrome. It gets a little tricky when you're first setting things up. When in doubt, reboot, try it again, or try a different browser, try incognito to make sure it's not the browser that's messing you up, it's something else. So we now have this working. I don't have access. I can verify authentication. So I can log in here. Let's make sure this works. Make sure I remember my password too. And this is, no, don't remember that. We can now see the products. We can now verify my authentication. So we're all good now. We have installed IIS locally. We have set it up. So we configured everything we needed to here. We are looking at this specific folder right here, the www root folder, which is what gets deployed. So now if we ever want to make a change to our application, let's bring up Visual Studio again. Let's hit stop. And let's just say we want to make a change to our app. Let's see what we do to change our application just slightly. Let's change our, we could change the manifest.json. I'll wait till the next lesson to do that. Let's change the index page. So instead of hello world, we're going to say hello IIS. Okay, just something to see that published version. We hit publish, wait for it to build and publish. That's kind of important. This can look like it's done, but notice it still says lower left-hand corner, publish started. So don't just run off to IIS and hit refresh in your browser, because that might not work, okay? Because it might not be published yet. And if it's not published yet, then hey, refresh, you're gonna see the wrong version here. Now it's published. If we hit refresh here, please wait, we're authorizing you. It's trying to authorize, and it says hello world. It's not finding anything here, but we're not running the API either. So let's run that and make sure. Remember, this will work offline. So let's get the API here. Let's run this and see if the new version will get us the hello IIS. Again, remember, since we have, and now we're back to that problem, I think, again. Let's hit F12 and failed to fetch. Okay, so the first time it failed to fetch, let's refresh here. Let's do this. We're gonna close this out and we're gonna open up a new tab. So let's go to localhost. And I should make sure it's HTTPS. There we go. And it's still using that old version. If we hit F12 here, we're getting a fail to fetch. And after even more playing around, yes, I've had some problems with this demo. It has worked and then not worked and worked and not worked. I figured out the other issue, which is that I have to use my desktop name, not localhost, because my certificate has my desktop name, not localhost. So let's hit enter there, and that works. So we have no errors now, and it says hello IIS. So let's just verify that does work yet again. When we reapply this, we will re-push down these changes and make sure that they are working. But let's go back over to our application. We'll hit stop. We're going to go back over here and say, what can you do, app? That is hopefully working. We hit save, and then we're going to publish that. All right, so hit publish in that and make sure that it does properly publish to the correct directory. So we'll open up that directory, and there we go. Let's delete the web.config. That we don't need that. The www root is here. That does show up properly. Let's launch again the API, because the API does have to be working in order for our site to work. And we should be able to say HTTPS and then our desktop name, and it pops up and it says, hello IIS, welcome to your new app, which is one version behind. All right, so if we do it again, we load it, it's still not working. One more refresh is what it took before it came. And that's why the debugging process with an offline worker like a progressive web application is so tricky. And that's why Microsoft disabled it, because even after a refresh, it doesn't always work. You got to make sure that it fully shuts down and starts back up in order to get that change applied. So that at least gives us our start to our application working offline. Okay, now the problem is going to be if we try to use this offline as it is right now, our authentication isn't going to work. And we're going to tackle that in the next video, where we'll make sure we wrap some of these things up with the offline ability of our application. But for now, this is working. It's a little kludgy to get IIS up and going locally with that local certificate. That's just because we're trying to kind of bypass the normal process for a certificate. And so that was a little bit more tricky. But now we have a certificate installed. It does work. It is secure. It is saying, hey, that's a valid certificate. Mine is good through next year. Okay. But it's installed. It's working. It's running locally. Next lesson, we're going to tackle the idea of making sure that if we are logged in, and let's make sure we can log in still. It's always good to test these things. If we are logged in and we go offline, that it will still work, okay? So we're logged in, we can see the products, we can verify authentication, but if we were to go offline, it would not work and we'd have some problems, okay? So I'm actually gonna turn off the site, and then let's bring it back up here, hit refresh, and say, hey, we're authorizing you, we're thinking about it. It has the old stuff still, because this is the old, it's hopefully working, but notice I'm not logged in, okay? I was logged in, I'm not logged in anymore, I don't have access, I'm not authenticated. So if I were to try to log in, obviously since the server's not there, it's gonna have a problem. So if you hit login here, it's gonna think about it and go, no. We got an unhandled exception. So we've got to figure out how to deal with offline access. Again, that's the next lesson. We'll tackle that so that if you are logged in, when you're offline, you can still use whatever you can do offline with that particular permission level, okay? So you can't log in when you're offline, but you can stay logged in if you were logged in when you were online, okay? So we'll tackle that next. All right, so thanks for sticking with us. Yeah, it's a little complicated with those certificates, but otherwise we have it running on IIS locally. We can do the same thing on the server using real certificates, and it'd be a whole lot easier. Thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.